Welcome to the number one podcast covering Michigan State basketball. The Final Four is not on the schedule. Join Rod and me, Eric, as we dive deep into the Spartans to get you prepared for every game. Subscribe today for in-depth recruiting updates and fantastic interviews with today's important college basketball personalities like Robbie Hummel.
Thanks for having me. I have listened to your guys' podcast numerous times on drives throughout any Midwestern Big Ten city. So I am big fans of your guys' work.
Jay Billis.
And next time, hey, if anybody in Michigan wants a December tea time, call me. You wimps won't show up, but I'll be there. I'll be there and play in the cold. And Izzo will be in front of the fire with hot chocolate.
Coaches Thomas Kelly.
No problem. Glad to be back, man. Glad to be back.
Mike Garland.
You just can't sit there and trade twos for threes. You can't do it. You're going to lose. Coming down the stretch, you're going to lose.
And more. You won't find better coverage of Spartan hoops than you will get here. For both the casual and hardcore fan, come along as we take you for a green and white ride. Hey everybody, it's Eric alongside Rod, here to discuss MSU's upcoming game against the lowly Michigan Wolverines at the Breslin Center. Before we begin, a quick word of thanks for all of you who support the show via one-time gifts and on a recurring basis. A special thanks to Patreon supporters at the Mateen Cleaves level, Bill Church, Brian O'Donnell, and Chad Hickey, and those of the Draymond Green supporters, Adam Wolzak, Dan Rankin, James Benton, Jim L., Michael Bosnick, Paul Marsh, and Scott Driscoll, as well as Rich Wagner and Kenneth Kremet on Substack, and all of you who support the Scott Skiles level as well. If you appreciate the MSU content we crank out, head on over to thefinalfourIsNotInTheSchedule.com/support to reach the necessary links. A good reason to sign up at the website to get on the email list is to get reminders, like for our temporary store, to get logoed apparel. We have a wider selection this time, and not only does it look great and feel great, but everything is getting sold at cost. T-shirts, hoodies, quarter-zip pullovers for men and women, full-zip sweatshirts, and even tote bags if you didn't get enough donating to your local PBS channel. They're all available. The store closes at February 5th at 8 p.m. So if you want some show gear, put your order in now. You can get to that at www.nudgeprinting.com/TFFINOTS, or you can also get a link to that on our support page. I think it's the second link down, the second picture. So it kind of sounds like our support page is the good place to hang out, wouldn't you say? All right, well, let's talk about the wounded Wolverines as Tom Izzo once again looks to capture his 700th career victory. It's time to start a new winning streak, and there'll probably be no better way than thumping U of M. Michigan is 7-13 overall, 2-7 in the conference, coming off a 10-point loss at home to Iowa in Ann Arbor on Saturday. The Wolverines are 86 in KenPom and 96 in the net, one spot ahead of Minnesota. In other words, they're not going to do anything after the Big Ten tournament's over. On offense, they're 47th overall, which is not too bad, probably better than we expected, certainly from our preview shows, but they've been a very good three-point shooting team at 37.2%. But they're mediocre inside the arc at 106th. They're okay offensive rebounding team at 93, but really have struggled with turnovers. They're ranked 171st in turnover percentage for possessions. They've shot free throws decently, but only at 71%, so they don't get there a whole lot. They're 228th in free throw attempts per field goal attempts. What is surprising, and what we did not expect when we were doing the preview show this summer, is the defense has been really bad. They're ranked 167th, which for a team that's been pretty decent defensively in the past. Jawan Howard, defensive background, coming out of the NBA. They added two guys in the portal, Kimura and Burnett, who had good reputations as individual defenders. They came from good defensive programs, and they've been bad. They replaced people who were bad. At least Dickinson and Jet, the Jet with two T's, Howard, they were both bad defensive players, and so on average, we expected them to be a lot better. To have Dickinson's minutes going to Terrence Reed, who looked like he was going to be pretty good defensively as a freshman. Well, anyway, obviously none of this really worked out. They were almost as bad as Iowa. Last year, they finished 168th, and so Michigan is knocking on the door of bad Iowa defense. And they give up 36% from three to opponents. They limit attempts to 48th, but they're only 149th against two-point shots. Bad defensive rebounding team at 250. They don't turn anybody over, and they're one of the worst 10 teams in America in the steal percentage. And they're 133rd in free throw attempts to field goal attempts by opponents. So they tend to foul a lot. And boy, if you watch the Iowa game, they fouled a lot. So they're just bad news all over. They're also a slow team overall, slow in offense, both at 207. and teams play pretty fast against them at 67 in length of average offensive possession against, which may in some way be contributed by the fact they turn the ball over so much.
Yeah, it's been very, to say it's been a strange year in Ann Arbor is stretching the limitations of that word. You start with the fact that Juwan Howard was not able to coach the team in the beginning of the season due to heart surgery, very serious and legitimate reason to not be coaching them. So his lead assistant, Phil Martelli, who obviously is a guy with a lot of experience as a head coach, ran the ship. But what's been in his absence, but what was weird about that is the transition of Juwan back into his role at head coach kind of seemed to come in fits and starts. And then after it had finally been firmly reestablished that Juwan was back, he turns around and has Phil Martelli designated as the head coach for their game against Penn State at the Palestra. Now, in a normal season, you might have looked at that and said, wow, what a magnanimous gesture. That's a cool thing. Because, of course, for those who don't know, Phil Martelli was the longtime head coach at St. Joseph's, another school that plays in Philadelphia and plays a certain percentage of their games at the Palestra. So if it was a normal season, right, you say, well, but it was not a normal season. It's been a completely chaotic, disastrous season. So instead, it just looked like one more, what the fuck are they doing kind of moment out of Michigan. And you then go to the fight with, and it varies depending upon who you talk to as to whether it ever got physical or not, with their longtime strength and conditioning coach, John Sanderson, which pretty clearly has had has been a problem, a fracture within that program, that incident earlier this year. And again, accounts vary as to the whys and wherefores of that. You have the Doug McDaniel situation, and we're assuming for the purposes of this preview that they're adhering to what they said in their various weird statements that they issued about this, which, by the way, the first one of those dealing with his academic ineligibility came from the player, and it had some choice language in it that had to later be censored. And then the school followed after that. It's just, we're assuming he's not playing because the statements indicated he would be sitting out the next 6 road games. That in and of itself, he plays at home but not on the road. That's where you're dealing with an academic problem. That's bizarre. The whole thing has just from start to finish been weird. And it's also been, as you outlined at the start of this discussion, really, really unproductive on the floor. Another weird thing, although it pales in comparison to some of the things we've already mentioned here, they are exactly the opposite of what not just us, but I think most people who view college basketball thought they would be. The thinking was they've lost Dickinson, they've lost Jet with 9 T's, and they've lost Kobe Buffkin, all to the end, well, 2 to the NBA and Dickinson to Kansas. Yeah. There's no way that their offense isn't going to take a significant step back. And in fact, even counting the new players, the transfers they brought in, there wasn't much of anything in the way of proven shooting. And so you looked at it and said, boy, this is a team that's going to have to win ugly. But I, for one, had some faith that they might actually be able to do that at a decent level, because even though they had holes defensively the last 2 years, and they did, by the end of those seasons, they were able to get to a point that they were at least, rejoining the human race defensively. Last year, it helped that Jet with 14 Ts sat out a number of games kind of in the mid-late portion of the season, and they got markedly better with him off the floor.
even having to play Dickinson. Part of that was that Terrace Reed, who was a freshman last year, was playing a bigger role, and he was really good defensively, shockingly good as a freshman, because you just don't expect freshman bigs to be competent. It usually takes those guys a while to get their legs underneath them. It didn't seem to with him. So there's that. There's the fact that these guys were being replaced to some degree by players who had much better defensive pedigrees. Olivier Kamua came from Tennessee. Rick Barnes's Tennessee is a great defensive program year in, year out. And he in particular had a reputation as a very good defensive power forward. Namari Burnett, and a McDonald's All-American who has not lived up to that billing in stops at Texas Tech and Alabama before he got to Michigan. But that's mostly been about offense. Defensively, he's been a very good player. And so, and again, I mentioned Terrace Reed basically soaking up Dickinson's minutes. And this team, you had good reason to look at this and say, okay, they've improved at multiple positions in terms of their defensive capability. And Juwan Howard is a guy with a defensive background. That's what he was in his assistant's role at Miami. He was a defensive specialist. That was the part of the game that he focused on. So, I think there was really sound reason to think, hey, they could be pretty good defensively. And that's where they're going to have to win games. They're going to have to win a lot of games in, say, the high 50s, low 60s. That's how they're going to have to play. Instead, it's been the complete opposite. They're actually scoring at a pretty good clip. Yeah. They're not a great offensive team by any means. For all the criticism that Michigan State gets offensively, Michigan State checks in significantly better than Michigan on the offensive end. But they're a solid offensive team, and they shoot the three well in particular. Defensively, they have been an abject disaster. I don't think anyone in the country saw this coming. You could say, well, okay, maybe they're not a great defensive team, and that would have been a total shocker if it had worked out that they were just okay. But nobody saw this. I want to clarify the point you made about comparisons to Iowa. Iowa last year, we talk about Iowa as kind of the negative standard bearer for defense in the Big Ten during the Fran McCaffrey era, because it's true. They're usually the worst defensive team in the league, or damn near so. Iowa last year finished 168 in KenPom defensive efficiency. That was, I believe, the second worst season. It was either the second or third worst season in the Fran McCaffrey era, one of the two. So that's a program that's perpetually bad defensively, and it's one of the worst seasons they've had in that run. Michigan is currently 167. That puts it all, or should put it all, into perspective as to how bad they are. And by the way, their schedule gets tougher in the second half. It's been the easy part thus far. So the odds are there's every chance that defensive ranking is going to get worse, not better, because they're going to be playing better opponents. You put all this together, and it's been an ugly picture. They don't rebound well. They're a truly awful defensive team, and they're good offensively overall, mostly because of that deep shooting. But that's not nearly enough to overcome these weaknesses. And that's how you get to the kind of season they're having, where they're 7-13. They've won 2 games in the league. I can tell you, I believe, and this is worth the paper it's not printed on, but according, KenPom is it has projections for how the rest of the season will go based on where they and their opponents stand currently. And I believe the projection is Michigan will win 2 games at home. One was against Rutgers, and I forget who the other was against. Probably either Penn State or Minnesota, I would guess.
They lost to Minnesota,
and that's it. Okay. So it's somebody else. Rutgers was one of them, but they're projecting 2 more wins. That would be a 4-16 season.
Yeah.
And I've seen this mentioned and I honestly do think there's some truth to it. For Michigan basketball in my lifetime, I would say the low point was the Brian Ellerby era.
Exactly.
And I think there's a pretty good argument that this is lower. Now, there's still time for it to change, but I also don't see a lot of reason to suspect it's going to change. They'll be better. They'll be better if on the court if they have Doug McDaniel out there full time, obviously, and we assume that's going to happen at some point. But they were losing with him. It's not like, oh, this is a sudden turn of events, and now they're losing games they were winning before. They were bad with him. They're losing games at home with him now, so that's not gonna solve anything. And by the way, that's supposedly another fracture. I talked about this litany of problems. There's a lot of reason to think that the team is not particularly paying attention to their head coach right now. There's been talk, and again, substantiating this stuff is difficult, but it's worth mentioning because we're seeing such a bad product on the court. You figure something has to be going on. I have seen speculation that there are fractures in the team in terms of how they view the Doug McDaniel situation being handled, that there are people who think he's been coddled. And I think there's a case for that based on the little bit that we do know. It's just an ungodly mess. And by the way, we haven't even mentioned, until I'm going to mention it right now, there's looming over all of this is the specter of multiple incidents, plural, that Juwan Howard has had in recent seasons leading up to this one, where he's been unable to maintain control and, all the rest of that, which is all well known to, I'm sure, just about everybody listening to this. So when you look at the total picture, it's to say that this is getting into Ellerby territory, I don't think is hyperbolic. I really don't. And you have to wonder where they go from here. As a Michigan State fan, I want them to keep Juwan Howard.
Yeah. Because
he's shown no indication that he's likely to make this program significantly better. I mean, I don't see the reasons why that's something that you would evaluate as being likely.
I think you're right.
But I don't know where they're going to go, because this is a program, I've seen some Michigan slappies refer to this as Juwan's COVID year. So they're comparing it to the 2020 nosedive that Jim Harbaugh took. And they say, well, that likely means, Juwan's going to get another chance to get this right. I hope so.
Yeah,
I really do. And, obviously, why I'm saying that. It's because I don't believe he will. And the fact is, if you're a Michigan State fan, you shouldn't root for Juwan Howard to be run out of town, because that means there's a chance that they could stumble into somebody better.
Yeah, well, at this point, that's likely.
And who wants
it's very
that?
likely.
Right? How could you be worse?
Yeah.
How could you be worse? But even if you take this season out of it, even if you do say, look, this season shouldn't even count. He wasn't healthy enough to coach in the beginning, and then A, B, and C happened. Okay, write this year off. You look at last year, they don't make the NCAA tournament. You look, despite the fact they had 2 first-round draft picks and a guy
number 1 transfer,
considered to be the best guy, right? The best guy in the portal, right? Year before that, they barely scrape into the NCAA tournament. So we had 2 years of significantly declining fortunes that were demonstrating a negative trend going into this season. So if you're a Michigan State fan, I think you have to look at it as, keep Juwan, give him a lifetime contract, keep him forever, because he's not shown that he's up for the task of returning this program to the kind of, relative consistency that they had under John Beilein. I think some Michigan fans lose a little bit of perspective in terms of the up and down that actually was the case during Beilein's tenure. But there's no question that he had that program in a spot where more years than not, you were going to look at them as a team in the mix at the top of the Big Ten. They would have the occasional year where they might not make the tournament or they'd slip and be mediocre, but more often than not, it was the most sustained success they'd had in a long, long time. And, you know, there's no indication that Juwan Howard is capable at this stage, no indication that he's capable at all of getting them back to those levels. So you want him to stay. I don't know. I think it's gonna be a really interesting one to watch, you know, to see how they handle it in this off season, because it's hard to imagine they don't have many, many more losses coming. And listen, I think it's possible. I wouldn't bet the house on it, but I think it's possible they don't get to double-digit wins overall. I mean, they're at 7 right now. So you have to figure that's going to mean at least 3 wins in the last 11 Big Ten regular season games, and then at least one Big Ten.
At least that first
game
in the tournament is probably an easier team, so you have a reasonable chance of neutral court winning that.
It is, and on a neutral court, but they got to find 3. And as I said, the schedule is going to be tougher than what they've played already. So that's in jeopardy. The idea of getting double-digit wins, which is a hell of a statement.
Well, I guess, my thoughts right now as far as Juwan Howard goes, I don't know that I think he's as bad as Ellerbe, sort of from success standpoint. Only because he was successful early in his tenure. You could say that's because he had Beilein's players, and I think that's
Ellerbe. Hey, wait a minute. Ellerbe won a Big Ten tournament title.
Oh, I didn't remember that. Okay.
In his first year. Yeah. It was the year Michigan State won the regular season title, then flopped in the quarters. It was the first Big Ten tournament. Ellerbe won that. And they were, I don't remember where they finished in the regular season, but it wasn't bad. Yeah, Ellerbe could win with other guys' players too.
Well, and then, I guess the other thing with Juwan, strange things that even when he was assistant coach, which was kind of weird, I think it was strange that he was serving as assistant, but still traveling with the team. And he got the double text in the one game. I don't know where it was, somewhere on the road. And, got tossed from a game as the assistant. So clearly, he was still the head coach, even though, because I can't remember how many instances I've seen an assistant coach get 2 technicals. I've seen it occasionally with it, gets teed up, but not twice to get tossed from a game on 2 separate occasions. Right. It's not like one incident where the guy just went bananas, right? So that was crazy. Right. And then, the whole fact that he's had the anger issues, we've talked about this ever since the incident with Wisconsin, where obviously it started earlier with Mark Turgeon with the words expressed.
Yep. That was the first one where it was blatantly obvious.
Yeah, where he struck someone, and the zero tolerance policy and whatever it is that was going on with the strength and conditioning coach and his problems on the court. You got a very stressful season, unsuccessful. Jace is I think this is his last year, probably, isn't it? Or he might have a COVID year or something. So. But
I believe he's done.
My feeling is the way it's going to work out is that they're just going to have a mutual parting of ways at the end of the season. I'm not sure what. I think it'd probably be like a retirement for health reasons. I mean, there are all kinds of reasons you could say, and maybe there's some truth to them. I don't know. But maybe he'll find himself somewhere else, like in the pro basketball, or maybe it'll just walk off in the sunset. I would be shocked if he comes back next year. Anything's possible. But the way the program looks, the way I don't think they even much for recruiting next year. I don't know. There's just nothing about that program is coming off as that you're going to be a lot better next year.
Well, disarray is a good word to describe it, because that's what it's negatively chaotic in Ann Arbor right now with this thing. I mean, that's just an accurate depiction. I don't know. I mean, it takes somebody with real self-awareness to walk away from it under these kind of circumstances and say, hey, I'm just not getting it done. I'm not doing myself or anybody else any favors. I'm gonna walk away. I don't know that I've seen the kind of things from Juwan Howard that would lead you to believe he's that kind of guy. So if that's the case, if I'm right about that, which again, admittedly is a wild guess, then it would come down to, do you believe Michigan's athletic department, their administration, is willing, capable, inclined to lean on him and say, look, you got to go. We don't want to fire you.
Right.
We'd rather this, but we will if we have to. Because that's what would have to happen if I'm right about Howard not seeing it that way. And I don't think there's a lot of reason to believe, either with this current group or the way Michigan's athletic department historically deals with basketball, to believe that that's likely. This, I mean, I can go through the history. I won't, but it cuts two ways. On the one hand, the line has always been the powers that be at Michigan ultimately just don't want basketball to have any meltdowns and reflect negatively upon the school. Like, they don't care enough to truly compete with the big boys. They'll take it if they can get it. And they're about, in the old days, there were always enough people with bags of money around the program that, they did have some very competitive. I mean, it's true. They were one of the true outlaw programs nationally. Everybody who knows their from that period knows that. But that didn't mean the school cared, it's always football there. So the idea was, that's why John Beilein was just about note perfect for that school, because he would be competitive and had some very, very good teams, but was never going to do anything to embarrass the school. Never. And that's really that's why a lot of those old timers really had problems with the Bill Frieder and especially Steve Fisher regimes, because they did do things that were perceived to be embarrassing. Well, you look at this, the Juwan Howard tenure has been nothing but embarrassment after embarrassment, right? Yeah. You would think that would be enough, but I'm not seeing, if that alone were enough, he'd have been gone before now. They had reasons. I mean, the Wisconsin thing was enough of a reason. Full stop. They had every justification to get rid of him after that, and they didn't. And they've let this season unfold with all its myriad bizarre, and the Sanderson thing would seem to be another, from what I understand about it, that would be another example where an administration inclined to get rid of him had enough. They could have said, we put this together with all the other crap that came before it. Let's just call it on this thing. Yeah. Let's get everybody a fresh start. They didn't do it. So I am inclined to be from Missouri on this one. I'm going to believe they get rid of him when I see it happen. Yeah. Well, and I think the fact that he's an alum, he's, part of an era that, for better or for worse, is deified in the minds of some of the people who actually do care about the sport there. I think that also complicates it, as a similar situation would anywhere. It's one of the reasons why hiring great former players, man, it's a double-edged sword. As a head coach, it's a double-edged sword, because if they can make it work, it's fantastic. But if it's not working, boy, then you're dealing with all kinds of psychological stuff to get rid of them. Yeah. And I just don't know that I believe that they're there yet. Maybe, but we'll see which one of us is right.
All right. Well, it'll be certainly interesting to see what happens. I guess, my assumption was always that Juwan would be back, but you're right. There are plenty of reasons to imagine that he is back next year. Although if you were to make an unpopular decision, like getting rid of someone from the Fab Five, maybe a year where you win the national championship in football might be an easier year to do that. But maybe then you can ignore it for the other year. I mean, you can make an argument either way, I suppose.
It's really hard, I think, to sort it out as to what's likely to happen, because I actually don't know that it would be so unpopular, because I think Michigan fans are extremely, extremely frustrated.
Yes, they are.
With where things are at. You'd have to be. So I don't think firing Juwan would provoke a storm of outrage in the Michigan fan base, such as it is. But On the other hand, I look at their track record and I think, well, I don't know if I believe that they're going to, I guess almost what I think is that I would feel more confident that he was in a prove it, do or die type situation if he had gotten some kind of equivalent to the M. Peter McPherson, you must have an outstanding season line that he gave to George Perlis.
Yeah.
The year before he fired him. Or kind of what Michigan did with Harbaugh coming off the COVID year where they cut his salary.
Yeah.
It feels to me like that's the thing that's more likely to happen this offseason than an outright firing, but who can tell? Because that's an athletic department that you would go broke trying to predict everything they're going to do.
Yeah, for sure. And that's definitely, they've had plenty of cause, like you mentioned before, for firing this season, and they have not yet done it. So,
yeah.
All right, well, let's move on to talk about the players on Michigan. This is brought to you by the Brothers Adjust Your Gutters, sponsoring our player that Michigan State has to keep in the gutter. The Brothers Adjust Your Gutters on both the West Side and the Metro Detroit area should be your first stop for getting work on your gutters. It's not glamorous, but they specialize just in new gutters, downspouts, those sorts of things, leaf guards. Whatever you need, they can do it, whether it's your business or your residence. They will replace them. They'll clean them out. They'll repair them. Again, whatever the job is, it's not too small or too big for the Brothers That Adjust Your Gutters. They came and did my house. They did my wife's work. They made some 30-foot long section of gutter for her work, which no one else wanted to come out, just put one section of gutter on. They came out and did it super quickly, efficiently, and they're very professional, super friendly people too when they come work. And they work in just about any weather as long as it's not totally dangerous. So they were out when it was miserable weather in February last year for our house and took care of everything. So you can definitely take a look, check them out. 10% off if you mention Final Four on your estimate. You can find links to that at the support page. That's tffinots.com/support. There you can find ways to get an estimate either from Kurt and his team out in the Grand Rapids area or Greg and his team in the Metro Detroit, the southeast side of the state. All right, so we'll begin with the starters. Jaden Llewellyn, who is the transfer they brought in last year, a 6'2" transfer from Princeton, missed most of last year with, I think it was an ACL injury, wasn't it? And then started this year hurt. He's really never been up to speed, really, even this season. I feel kind of bad for the kid. He came all the way out here and it's really never worked out. So he's going to be the point guard starter because Doug McDaniel, as you mentioned earlier, we expect that he's not playing. We expect that the road ban includes East Lansing, but there's some people suspecting it's more of a state of Michigan. So who knows? They're making up the rules as they go along as it is. He's only played in 10 games, only averaging 12 minutes a game, scores 4.3 points a game on 46, 53, and 50 shooting. A very limited volume, obviously. He has 10 assists to 13 turnovers, which is not great numbers for a point guard.
The story of Jaden Llewellyn there, I think, is both an indictment of the Howard regime and also a story that, and I'm raising this because I've seen in the Michigan State online fan base, at least, as was probably entirely predictable after the loss at Wisconsin, the wringing of hands and the gnashing of teeth and the rending of garments has been in full effect. And we're back to this question of the transfer portal, since that is the obvious solution for everybody now.
Yep.
Yeah, one thing that I find funny, it's true of Michigan as well, but it's true of many other teams. Lots and lots of teams add multiple guys in the portal every year. If you look around the Big Ten this year, I'd have to go through it to be certain, but I'm reasonably certain I'm right about this, that well over half of the teams in the conference have added at least 2 guys from the portal this season.
Yeah.
But somebody's got to lose these games too, right? So
What?
This idea that somehow that's an automatic answer is, well, not supportable, because somebody's losing games too. And if everybody's doing the same thing, or most everybody is, somebody's also losing. Michigan would fit that category, but I bring it up here specifically because Michigan had Doug McDaniel as a recruit, and that was fine. If you remember, they had a guy
named Frankie Collins, who was a freshman 2 years ago. And at the end of the year was playing pretty well for Michigan. I remember it because I had to sit in that dank pile of dung they call Chrysler Arena and watch him and his teammates tear Michigan State up. And so he was playing pretty good basketball that year. And they had signed McDaniel, but that was fine. That was all known and understood. So, it was, Collins had a year on McDaniel. He would have obviously been the starter coming back. But they went out and added Llewellyn. And to make it worse, we're openly talking about him as a guy who could and would play point guard.
Yeah.
Collins left almost immediately, transferred to Arizona State. And I'm not here to say that Frankie Collins has become a superstar, but Frankie Collins has done some things well at Arizona State, and he unquestionably would have been a better option to have last year and this year. Even if Llewellyn had been healthy, I'm maintaining that's the case. Because I have a guy I know who I think he's unfortunately a less frequent poster on the Spartan mag boards now than he used to be, but he's somebody I know that I've actually met in real life, whose son is a member of the Yale basketball team.
Yeah.
And so he had watched a lot of Ivy League basketball, and he'd seen Llewellyn. And when they got Llewellyn, and I'm reading all this point guard stuff, and I had vague memories of what he was at Princeton. And I asked him, I said, is he a point guard? And he said, absolutely not.
Yeah.
And that's kind of how it's been borne out. 10 assists, 13 turnovers, right? And when he played last year before he got hurt, he didn't look like any kind of point guard to me. Now, in very low volume, since he's come back and been able to play, he shot the ball pretty well. That actually was something that I think they had reason to think, well, he can help as a shooter. But this was ill-conceived from the get-go.
Yeah.
I mean, it really was. And the injuries have made it even worse, obviously, but it was never a good idea. Never. And I hold this up as an example for these idiots who talk about, well, Michigan State had scholarship slots, just go bring it. They think it's a video game.
Yeah.
Not a video game. You're dealing with real people. And Michigan 2 years ago is an example of what happens. I think I have to believe Michigan thought, well, we can add Llewellyn, and then we've got him. We've got a freshman in Doug. We won't have to lean on very much because we got Frankie Collins too.
Right,
well, no, you
right.
don't. Frankie Collins sees it, says, hey, my playing time's going to get eaten into. Maybe my role is gonna be cut significantly. I don't want to be around for that. And he's out the door.
Yep.
That's reality. So it was a bad idea from the start, and the injuries have only made it worse. We're assuming he's the point guard here because other than Doug, Llewellyn's the only guy
There's no one
left
else. Yeah.
who can even pretend to call himself one, even though he really isn't one. So they're in trouble with this kind of setup, I know they've been a decent to good offensive team this year, but most of that to date is with Doug McDaniel running the offense.
Right.
In these situations, they're not the same team, and that's why we probably need to put a little bit of an asterisk by their offensive numbers when we think about this particular game. Again, assuming that the suspension actually does apply to road games within the state of Michigan, which we're assuming, but hey, it's Michigan, so who knows?
I think, this is the point about the transfers, and we mentioned this before, obviously, we've talked about this many times, but you look at someone like Kansas State is a great example. Well, I think you first start with Mel Tucker. Mel Tucker brings in Kenneth Walker, transforms the team. They have a magical season. But it was clearly a smoke and mirrors in some ways because it was pretty much just Kenneth Walker because he leaves and the team's, pretty much the same team for the most part. And they're a completely different team and he never recovers despite leaning heavily on transfers the whole time. And I know people looking at Wisconsin, they say, kept bringing AJ Storr. Look, they turned a team that was pretty good or okay. And they became a they became a very good team, maybe the best team in the Big Ten. But in some ways there's an element of luck that's always the case, even when you bring in high school recruits too. You look at Kansas State last year. This year, their net ranking 74, despite, so it's not like there's, I think people think that you can be a savant when it comes to transfers and you can bring the right people in, and maybe, but I think there's more variability in there than people recognize. And you can look at it and say, oh, you got that one guy. Well, there weren't that many people looking at AJ Storr or, whomever it might be. He just happens to work and fit perfectly and has played better or whatever. So the thought that you can just do these things and it works out perfectly, I think the proof is in the pudding, and it's, for the most part, it has not worked out for lots of teams. But as you say, 50% of the teams win and 50% of them lose.
I could spend hours talking about this, and I want to be very careful especially for the comprehension challenged who may be hearing this. I am not anti-portal. As a general principle, I think in a system where athletes are not being compensated, the idea that we also restrict their ability to choose where they wish to be much more strictly than we do regular students, for example, is stupid. And so the right thing has happened. Actually, the perfect thing, well, maybe not perfect, but the right thing to happen would be to compensate them. And then once they're actually being compensated, you can put into place rules that govern where they can, their ability to move, and you get out of this perpetual free agency thing. And I think that's what's going to happen
for sure,
sooner or later.
Yeah,
but we are where we are now, and for all the ills of the transfer portal that Tom Izzo talks about, I agree with him on a lot of them. I think they're very obvious truths in what he says, but none of that outweighs the validity of the idea of them being able to do it. So let's start with that. Then the next bit is for Michigan State specifically. Who are you going to tell to leave off this team this year if you're going to add someone? Here they said, how much better would Michigan State be if they had AJ Storr instead of Jaden Akins? I don't think you would have found very many people anywhere in the college basketball world who would have made that trade in September or October.
Right.
Jaden Akins was seen as a guy ready to make a step up and a breakthrough. AJ Storr had a good freshman year at St. John's, was a highly regarded transfer, but he's played beyond even those expectations.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Nobody was going to make that trade. But even if they would have, from a talent basis, the most important point is Tom Izzo has told you over and over and over and over and over and over and over, and I could keep using that word till infinity, that he doesn't want to operate a transactional program. So he's not going to do it. Now, will he use the portal when there's a need on his roster to fill it, as he has in the past? Yes, he will. If he had an exodus of players, if for some reason we have a freshman or two from this year's class who decides to leave, or one of the big men decides to go, Mahdi decides not to take his fifth year, would he add maybe two guys in the portal this year? Yeah, he's gonna fill out a roster.
Yeah.
But it's not ever going to be his preferred mode of operation. He's just not going to do it because he doesn't want to have that kind of program. And he's said it 100 different ways. So I don't know why people are deluding themselves into even talking about it. It's pointless.
Yeah.
Well, and that's apart from what we just said. Somebody's losing these games too, man. and you make a good point with Kansas State. All the lauding, the great job Jerome Tagg did last year, assembling that roster virtually from scratch in the portal. What a wonderful season. Where are they at now? Same thing, same kind of approach, because all those guys left, or most of them did.
Mm-hmm, right.
What's happening now? No, it's like anything else in the world. Nothing is a panacea. People have these dreams, and that's the last thing I'll say about it. It goes back to what we were talking about with Michigan, Frankie Collins and Llewellyn, to bring it back around to that. A lot of fans who don't understand how things actually are think
that it's like a video game. And real life isn't like that. And why is it not like that? Because you're actually dealing with people. And people react to changed situations in ways that you might not like or even anticipate. Case in point, Frankie Collins leaving Michigan within like a day of them announcing that they signed Jaden Llewellyn.
Yeah.
I honestly don't think Michigan's coaches saw that coming. They should have, but they didn't. They were thinking like guys playing a video game. And instead, real life Frankie Collins came along and said, I don't like this. See you later.
Well, let's go on to the next starter is Nimari Burnett. Speaking of transfers, 6'5" Alabama transfer, averaging 9.7 points a game, 4.6 rebounds a game, shooting 37, 33, and 75. One of the better players. He's got 55 assists to 30 turnovers.
He helps mitigate the absence of Doug a little bit, but he's also not a real point guard. He's just a good secondary playmaker. Yeah, I think this is what they hoped. What they hoped when they got him, as I mentioned earlier, Burnett was a McDonald's All-American, very highly regarded player, I believe, out of the Chicago area. And Michigan was in on him at a high school, too. Didn't get him. He went Texas Tech, transferred out of there, played a couple of years at Alabama, and now has come back around to Michigan. And I think, his career had been disappointing based on expectations. He wasn't a bad player, but just he wasn't the offensive player people had hoped. And I think Michigan's hope was here he's going to be in a little bigger role. We're going to lean on him a little bit more. The hope would be that he grows into that, improves offensively, and also gives them a lockdown defender on the wing, something they did not have last year, and also good secondary playmaking. The defensive part has not happened. I'm not going to blame their defense on him individually so much, but he clearly has, when you're as bad as they are, collectively, everybody's got to take some ownership, right?
Yeah.
The offensive blossoming, I think early in the season, he was on kind of a heater, shooting the three. I seem to remember, I'd have to go back to confirm this, but I seem to remember in November, December, his numbers were actually pretty good shooting the ball. They've gotten back now to his offensive numbers are more or less, they're not too different than they were at Alabama last year.
Sure.
So he sort of settled into, at this stage, I think you kind of have to conclude, well, this is who he is. It wasn't just that he needed an opportunity to be closer to being the man to grow offensively. It's just this is what he is. Mm-hmm. On a good team, Nimari, as he was last year with Alabama, Nimari Burnett would be a valuable guy, but he'd be a valuable guy as very much a role player.
Right.
And Michigan needs him to be more than that. I'm not sure he's capable of it.
So then we move on to Terrence Williams, 6'6" senior forward. He's actually been very good this season. He's averaging 12.7 points a game on 44, 42, and 80 shooting, pulls down 4.3 rebounds a game, and has always been a player who was somebody you have to pay attention to, but seems to have really moved it up a little bit this season.
He's been more consistent, I think, with the jumper. He's shown flashes of it in the past, but he's been a steady three-point shooter. He's a big part. I think his emergence is a big part of why that offense has surprised some to the upside. He's definitely part of it. They coming into the season, there was a real concern. I thought, okay, Burnett's going to play one wing. Who's going to be the other one? And because Terrence Williams has mostly been a four in his Michigan career, but he's had to play the three. And now look, defensively, hey, it's not great, but he's given them scoring. He's given them consistent perimeter shooting, and as a fourth-year guy, and it's a career that maybe hasn't blossomed quite the way they thought it might when he was a freshman. I think there was a thought that because he came in kind of ready to play and he was a contributor immediately. I think there was a thought that, hey, maybe they've got somebody who can surprise a bit to the upside and be a really good player for them. He's never quite been that, but his sophomore, junior seasons were just dreadfully inconsistent and probably more bad than good. So judged on that by those metrics, I think this has been a successful senior year for him.
Then be the other big transfer, the one much ballyhooed, Olivier Kamura, 6'10" out of Tennessee, averaging 16.3 points a game and 7.1 rebounds a game, shooting 52, 35, and 68. And also has 53 assists to 50 turnovers in 20 games.
Yeah, and so for a power forward, those aren't bad numbers.
Yeah.
He's, look, in terms of the scoring and the rebounding, I'm not sure that you could have reasonably expected a lot more than that.
Right.
The shooting, this is the thing, though. The knock on him from Tennessee people was inconsistency. That he was a guy, a lot of his reputation got made in that game, that second round game where they beat Duke. Yeah. Or was it a Sweet 16 game? I can't remember which, but he had a huge game against Duke. And the Tennessee people's reaction was, yeah, but the problem is we've seen that before. He'll put 25 on somebody, and then the next night he scores 2. That hasn't been the case nearly as much this year. I think he's been pretty consistent. But, again, the disappointment is this is a guy who was supposed to key serious improvement in your defense, and that just has not happened. And I think the other thing is that as a shooter, he's kind of been who he always was this year. He's a good, 35% for a 4-man from 3 is not a terrible number, and he shoots enough of them. So it's good volume too. That's a real number. It's not bad, but it's not quite at that level where, say, a Joey Hauser was last year, where every time he gets an open look, you're holding your breath.
Yeah, right.
It's not quite there. It's somewhere in between okay and that, and that's for this team, that's just not enough. But I think, again, the bigger thing is he's got to own some level of the issues defensively, because he was a guy who they thought was going to be a big part of a complete turnaround at that end. And instead, it's gone much, much, much worse.
Yeah, and finally, it'd be Terrace Reed, 6'10", sophomore, as you mentioned before, good defender last year. He's averaging 8.6 points a game and 6.5 rebounds a game, along with a little over a block a game, shooting 57% from the floor, but only 58% from the line, which actually is better than last year. He also
remember last year he was in the 30s,
except when he played Michigan State. I feel like that game he shot like 70-some%. Not very good handling ball. He's a turnover machine. 37 turnovers to just 12 assists.
Yeah. I still think there are portions of the Michigan fan base that seem to be down on him. I still think that with 2 years of eligibility left, at least, that there's a reasonable chance that Terrace Reed is very decidedly a plus player down the line overall. I still believe that. I can't account for the defensive regression because, man, that was the thing last year that caught my eye. Is this is a legitimately big kid. Like, he's a legit college 5 physically, but his footwork, that a guy his size was able to move that way, lateral movement, all of it, really, really impressed me. And I could see why Michigan State had recruited him hard, why they wanted him, because that's the perfect Tom Izzo big man, a guy who's big enough and has the raw material at least to have a chance to be a legitimate post player on offense at some point, but who you can play the way you want to play with on defense. It's perfect. And I thought he'd be really good this year. What I thought was, okay, he's going to take Dickinson's minutes. There's no way he's going to give him the scoring Dickinson did, but the totality of how he plays, it might not be as much of a drop-off as some think, because I think he's going to make them a lot better defensively. That couldn't have been further from the truth. Offensively, he's kind of where I thought he'd be, which is he's not ready for prime time yet. He shows you potential, but he doesn't have great post moves just yet. Mm-hmm. Sometimes he can get stuff done because of his body, his strength, but, he's not a great low post player. But the problem's been defense, man. I just did not see this coming.
Well, since the top of the reserves is Will Cheddar, I think it's safe to say that one of these first 5 starters are the player that Michigan State needs to keep in the gutter. Who would that be?
Kamua, for
Kamua,
sure.
Yeah.
I mean, he's there. He's the top scorer among guys that are expected to play. McDaniel actually leads them in scoring. And, he's a veteran. He's the guy who will be playing against Malik Hall, presumably, which will be important for Michigan at that end if they can slow down Malik. He's pretty clearly the guy, I think.
Well, moving on to the reserves, Will Cheddar, 6'8", junior, averaging 7.2 points a game and 2.4 rebounds a game in about 17 minutes. Shoots 63, 59, and 70. So it's amazing. If the guy shoots like that, why is he not on the floor?
Well, why do you think? Yeah, he has offensively, he'd be another guy, although it's not nearly the volume that you put alongside Williams and say, well, you want to look at why they've surprised to the upside offensively. That's another guy who shot the ball finely because he was billed coming out of high school as a shooter.
Supposed to be good,
and he really wasn't very good early on at Michigan. But boy, those numbers are kind of eye-popping, right?
Yeah.
But he can't guard anybody. He just can't guard anybody. And so that's not a winning combination, even with shooting numbers like that.
Sounds like he's going to transfer to Iowa. Moving on to next reserve is be Trey Jackson, 6'10", Seton Hall transfer, native of Detroit. He just was injured, so he's back playing, averaging 5.4 points a game and 2.6 rebounds a game in 16 minutes, but he didn't play much against Iowa, shooting 45, 23, and 73.
Yeah, they brought him in for 2 reasons. They thought that from Seton Hall, they thought that he could maybe give them some stretch effect at the 4 and maybe even the 5 on offense. That really hasn't panned out. But he was also a guy with a pretty good defensive reputation at Seton Hall, and he has not proved. There were people that were seriously talking about this guy. I said the 4 and the 5, but there were people who were talking about him as a potential starter at the 3. And I think Terrence Williams saved them from that because I do not think that would have gone well. And for a situation as bad as theirs, are you saying it could have been worse? I'm saying it could have been even worse.
Next, we'll go to Jace Howard. That's Jace with 1 C. 6'6" senior. The other son who's not nearly as good. His brother's obviously in the NBA. So Jace averaging 2.8 points a game and 1.5 rebounds a game in 9 minutes, shooting 27, 29, and 75. He was recently injured, so he's actually been injured for a lot of the season. So this will only be his 5th game. And he's the one who's actually involved in the altercation with the strength and conditioning coach, or at least it's not clear what happened, but it had something to do with him, whether he was showing up late or something like that.
Them's the rumors, yes, that it was a family thing that got Juwan Howard involved. Jace has just come back recently. He's been out most of the year, and he's always been a guy. I mean, he started off as a walk-on. He was certainly good enough to be a D1 player. So this isn't, and no knock on Steven Izzo, but this is not a Steven Izzo scenario.
Right, yeah.
Even though he started as a walk-on, Jace Howard could have played somewhere at a lower level D1, but he wasn't a Big Ten caliber recruit like his brother Jet with 38 Ts. He's a guy. He's a player that earlier in his career, I think, showed signs of maybe being an effective energy guy for them.
Try hard guy.
And there could be a role for someone like that on your team, but I'm not sure that it matters much on a team that's this bad.
And finally, George Washington III, freshman guard out of Ohio. They were really big on him, I know, coming in. 6'3", averaging 7 minutes a game, scoring just barely a point a game on 25, 33, and 83 shooting.
Yeah, they were glad to get him, but I think he ended up, and I'd have to verify this, but I want to say he ended up maybe just outside the consensus top 100 high school recruiting. He's an Ohio kid who started out committed to Ohio State, then decommitted, ended up at Michigan.
Maybe that's why they excited about him, because he left Ohio State for Michigan.
Yeah, but from the point that he got there and he started practicing during the off season, at least what I was seeing, there were not realistic expectations that he was going to come in and be a major player as a freshman. So the way his season has gone has not been a surprise. The sense I got is that they felt like maybe down the line you could get something like an Eli Brooks kind of level where, good two-way player, not a star, but guy could make you some shots. He can guard well, help with ball handling a little bit, kind of a versatile guy. It's just too early to tell, I think, how it's going to pan out for him at Michigan, because it's been a very muted impact. I do think we will see him in this game, whereas if it was a game that McDaniel was playing in, that would be maybe a little less likely.
Right.
But I think out of necessity, they just don't have many guards. So I think we'll see him.
All right. So brought to you by the Squeegee Squad of Grand Rapids is the Michigan State player that cleans the glass best. Currently, you've had 4 in a row, so you're up 4-3, and I get to pick first this time. So I'm going to go with Madi, and hopefully this time he pulls through for me.
All right. I'm going with Malik Hall. No surprise.
Yeah.
They seem to be the 1 and 2 guys pretty much every week, and for good reason.
Yeah, absolutely. And I don't know, do you know the story about Madi had a family member pass away, and then it was he didn't tell the team until after the game? I guess
it was his grandmother, who I believe was in her 90s.
Oh, okay.
I saw a photo of him talking to her. I assume maybe his last trip home during this past off season.
Okay.
But yeah, it's, a good reminder, if you needed one, that again, not a video game. These are real people. Real people with real things happening in their lives. Yes. Right.
Yeah. And that's brought to you by the Squeegee Squad of Grand Rapids. They can find links on our page, at the support page. Again, the Final Four is on theschedule.com/support. You get a link for 15% off your estimate if you're in the Grand Rapids area, but their area is pretty big. I mean, they cleaned the windows of the state capitol, not long ago, which is pretty cool. But they can do any sort of job. Obviously, they can do the big jobs like a state capitol. They can do small jobs like your house or your business, maybe a high rise, whatever it might be. They can be the ones to do it for you. They'll get the inside, the outside of your house. They'll power wash it. Whatever you need done, they will do it. And let me tell you, they were the nicest people when they came at our house. Super thorough. And I thought I could see out my windows fine, but now I've had my screens that are clean, which I didn't really recognize how not clean my screens were. And so it made a huge difference. And so I appreciate the work they did. And I'd recommend to anyone else listening to the show too. So again, the Squeegee Squad of Grand Rapids. All right. So the 5 keys of the game brought to you by the Nudge Printing. And Nudge Printing is sponsoring the trivia question for a free hoodie. So it's free to enter. All you need to do is just go to this website and answer the trivia question. And then you can be entered in the drawing. Everyone who enters in the drawing at least wins $5 gift card to Nudge Printing. So you can't lose. It's free money, right? So go to nudgeprinting.com/TFFINOTS, or on our support page, you can go and click to get to the page, which leads to the trivia question. And the trivia question is, March 4, 2000, Michigan State won 114-63, so a 51-point victory over a team where Mateen Cleaves set the single season and Big Ten record for most assists in one game at 20. Which team did Michigan State beat that day? We're not looking up to find out if you're cheating. I guess you could just say this is an open book test. Maybe that's a good way of putting this. So you can certainly look that up. You have to have your answer in by the beginning of the Michigan game. So we're going to announce the winner after the Michigan game. So you have to figure out who Michigan State was playing and beat by 51 that day. And if you haven't figured out by now, I don't know, get on Google or something. So you get some great quality gear from Nudge Printing. If you want to check out the other selection, you can go to nudgeprinting.com. You can get 20% off your order if you type in Final Four and the coupon code. And we have a ton of stuff, as I mentioned to you before. And Nudge Printing is the one, they open up the store for us. And so you can get logo gear, all kinds of selection there too. So you just go to that, and that is easily linked on our support page as well. And then you can get the t-shirts, hoodies, whatever it is. Those orders have to be in within about a week and a half. And again, all the high quality stuff that you're used to getting from Nudge Printing. So they sponsor the 5 keys of the game. So what are they? Number 1, guarding the arc. So we obviously heard that Michigan has, if the one thing they do well offensively is shoot the three.
Yeah, this is a team where it's a situation where, and you're surprised to be saying it about a Big Ten opponent, but it's 3-point shooting is an area where a lesser team can hang around and sort of even the odds, right?
Right.
Against an opponent that's superior to them. But if you get enough production from three, you can make up a lot of ground in other areas. It can cover for a lot of ills. And Michigan has proven to be a team that can shoot well from three. Now, it's important to note, without McDaniel, and I should take a quick look. So let us do that.
How are they shooting without McDaniel?
Quick. Yeah, because I didn't do it, and I should have.
They had them Saturday, and they still lost to Iowa.
Yeah, they've definitely still been losing, but I want to see, because and again, it's not just about his shooting, but also what he creates for teammates. So how much better. So it'll be interesting to tell here. And I got to go down all the way down here to find Michigan buried down here in the 80s on KenPom. So I'll try to do that here real quickly. But
while you're looking that up, I just, the one thing I'd say is about this game, and I don't want to say that it's a must-win game in the sense that, this is but because of Michigan State and the way they've been playing and, the opportunities to get really good quality wins, a lot of these games that we think they're games they should win are ones that they kind of almost in many ways have to win, right? Because your opportunities for getting real high quality wins are pretty low at this point. Just Illinois at home and then at Purdue and maybe at Indiana or something like that might be worth something. But it just makes me a little bit more nervous about these. I'm always nervous for the Michigan game because weird stuff happens in rivalry games, and so that always is the case. But it feels like it'd be a very not only painful in the sense that you're losing to Michigan, but also that it'd be pretty significant if you're to lose to Michigan. So these games are more important in that sense, if you know what I mean, just because you haven't built up a bank of wins.
There's no question. Okay, so granted, this is Purdue at Mackey Arena. They went 9 for 29, 31%. Well, there haven't been many. I think the only other away game, so that would be ones without Doug, was at Maryland. And they were 5 for 15 in that game for 33.
Yeah.
So 33 and 31% in the two games that they played without him. So that tells you that, yes, it's probably having an effect. But even with that said, the point still stands. You cannot let Michigan allow their 3-point shooting to keep them afloat in this game.
Next key to the game is live ball turnovers, which means steals. Michigan has been very susceptible to opponent steals, and that's with Doug playing.
Yeah, it's they give up some. I think that's something that we've seen Michigan State actually be pretty effective with at times this year, where particularly in situations where you have a guard attempting to penetrate and a help defender is able to come over and get a strip. That's been something that's that they've done, executed reasonably well. And I think they're going to be, again, no Doug McDaniel. So who are the guys that are going to be trying to do this? They're going to be guys like Namari Burnett, Jaden Llewellyn, maybe George Washington III. You would think that there will be an opportunity to get that done in this game. And if you can, that's going to help everything. It's going to help you get out in transition, should lead to easier baskets, et cetera, et cetera.
Third key to the game is defensive rebounding. Michigan isn't a good offensive rebounding team. They rank 93rd, but, Michigan State has shown an inability to defensive rebound a lot. Michigan's better than Wisconsin, and Wisconsin ate Michigan State up at the boards.
Wisconsin is ranked, I believe, 16 spots lower than Michigan, and they tattooed MSU the other night. So we've seen this play out where teams that aren't top 20 offensive rebounding groups
fare better against Michigan State than teams that are. And it's another surefire way. You want to let a bad opponent stay in the game with you, let them get second chances.
Yeah.
So Michigan, and that's the thing. For all Michigan's problems, one thing that their problems with their roster, I mean, one thing that's absolutely true is they're big. You look at this team, the starting lineup alone, they're going to roll out 6'5" and 6'6" on the wings, and then 6'10", 6'10" inside. And Trey Jackson 6'10" off the bench. Shetter is 6'8". You know, there's some size there. And that's something that Michigan State has got to be able to counter. You cannot let Michigan find ways to hang around by getting second and third opportunities.
Fourth key to the game is pace, which we say virtually every game. Although interestingly, what we don't say every game is AJ, which we used to say every game before. So that's kind of gone away.
Yeah, he's but pace is related to him because
I was going to say it's related to him. Yeah,
it's first and foremost it falls on his shoulders to make sure that Michigan State is playing at the pace they need to, which means generally fast. We talked about maybe getting some steals defensively is one way they can get into transition. Obviously, controlling the defensive boards. We talked about that with Coach Garland. And we've talked about it earlier in the season. It's not even just solely getting defensive rebounds. It's getting clean defensive rebounds that enables you to get your transition game going. And then, of course, we know MSU will look to run off made baskets. I think Michigan, to say the least, when you're ranked where they are, is an undisciplined defensive team. Yeah. So should Michigan State be able to get transition opportunities in this one? You would think so. You would think so.
Number 5, under control.
Yeah, and here's what I mean by this. We know Michigan State has gotten off to a start they would prefer were different. In the season overall and Big Ten play.
Yeah.
They're looking to win this game to get back to 500 in the league at the halfway point. That's not where anybody, I'm sure it's not where they thought they'd be. It's not where I thought they'd be. Probably not where you thought they'd be. Probably not where many, if any, of our listeners thought they would be. But it's where they are. And you got a rival coming in, and it's a rival that's wounded. And one of the things you would be a little concerned about, although it's going to be tougher at Breslin, but one of the things you'd be concerned about is Michigan's got very little left to play for this year. But one thing that is left to play for in this game is the fact that they could take a big chunk out of their rival's season, right? So I'm expecting that they're going to throw everything they've got at this from an effort and energy. We have not seen that be very good for Michigan this year. They have not been a particularly energetic or tough or focused team. I'm expecting, at least in the beginning stages, I'm expecting we're going to see a better effort in those regards from them in this game. It would be wise to expect that. But it's your rival. And so it's easy to understand how there could be a tendency for Michigan State to want to do too much in a game like this, right? And that's another way you let Michigan find itself in a game, is if you're trying to do too much, you're trying to view this as more than just one game. And it's rare I talk about it this way. Usually a Michigan State game, we are talking about controlling your emotions, but emotions are still a big part of it. You need to be a little jacked up. This one, I really feel like it behooves Michigan State to, as much as they can, not try to make this thing be worth more than it actually is.
Right.
It's one game. It's a game they need, but it's one game. Play within yourself. Don't let yourself get suckered into trying to do too much and then find yourself with a problem because of that.
Yeah.
That makes sense. And that goes to everything. That goes to not trying to make home run passes. That goes to being responsible defensively, not taking chances because you're looking to make a big interception or a big block and you get yourself out of position.
Yep.
It's all of those things. Don't let the emotions carry you too far outside of the spot you need to be in.
Yeah, absolutely. All right. Well, I think we'll leave it there. Again, Tom Izzo looking for a 700th career win. So I suspect you would get this. But to your point, probably need to treat this more like Penn State coming in just to get business done. And then certainly can have fun maybe at the end of the game. See a little Steven Izzo action if things go well. Again, visit our sponsors. That's the Nudge Printing at nudgeprinting.com, Brothers Adjust Your Gutters at brothersgutters.com, and the Squeegee Squad of Grand Rapids. And that's a long website, so just go to our support page and you can click through there. If you want to support the show, again, that's a good place to go. Again, the store is open for a little bit, so you can until February 5th, so you can get our logo gear. And you can also enter the trivia question to win a free hoodie at Nudge Printing by answering the question about which team Michigan State beat by 51 points, where Mateen Cleaves set the Big Ten and Michigan State single game record for assists at 20. Which team they beat. And you have to have that answer in by the Michigan game. All right. No more hints. All right. So, again, until next time, the Final Four is on the schedule. Go Green.